Mitch Hashem, we're going to be learning in Shul on Shabbos, but I'm also going to be saying share again much of Shabbos for people who are not going to be able to make it to Shul. And then starting Sunday, we'll be learning in Shul, and we'll also still be broadcasting it. So this way we could accommodate everybody who feels they want to come or not. Okay, so let's see what we have over here. We are up to Chafhei Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. Hahi Avarnika. Let's see how it's pronounced. It was called a Abvarnika. There was an Abvarnika, and the translation of Abvarnika is an arbor. What it means is, in the middle of this fellow's orchard, middle of the Reish Busha's orchard, he had a beautiful tree around which he built a little bit of a patio or a gazebo, and people would go there to cool off. It was a nice shady area. I think it's probably the first place where air conditioning is mentioned in the Gemara. It was a place for people to escape the heat. I remember in the 70s when air conditioners came out, so there was no such thing as central. There was these little window units. And we had one window unit in one area of our house in the front entrance. And like we were so excited with how wonderfully cool our house was because of one little window unit in the entrance. But when the air conditioning was still a novelty, every little thing you had was very, very exciting. Today, people wouldn't be able to survive with one small window unit to the entrance of their home. But in those days, they did it with a tree. So if you're talking about green energy and green air conditioning, sitting under a tree is about as green as it gets. And that was their version of air conditioning. So Rashi says, what is a Varniki? Rashi says it's a ilam, it's a tzilai meruba. It's a big tree that has a huge canopy, so it creates a lot of shade. The noitin oisai asorim, only the wealthy plant these special types of trees. The oisin it's tabois tachtov sevivoisov, and then they set up a series of benches around the street underneath its shade. Lisloin and tachtov, to rest there. Be a moisachama in the summer. Will samech and to be happy. So it was a version of their air-conditioned social space. So I know somebody told me, Pesach told me, that in the 60s and the 70s, when air conditioning was a novelty, people would go to the movie theaters because the movie theaters were from the only places that were air conditioned. So people would go just to get cooled off. And he told me that there was a big Talmud Chacham in Chicago, I don't remember the name, and somebody went to the movie theater and asked the manager of the movie theater if he would let this Talmud Chacham sit and learn in his office, because his office was air conditioned, so that he could sit and learn in a little bit of comfort for a couple of hours. So there's a certain Talmud Chacham that every day went to the movie theater so that I could sit and learn in the manager of the movie theater's office. I'd love to see the optics of that. Can you imagine like a Pat Kinesti, like walking into the front door of a movie theater so he can get an air-conditioned office? I remember we wanted to buy Ravel Yishvei an air conditioner because we used to come over to his house Friday night and he would give a chumash and it was so terribly hot. He didn't have air conditioning. Can you imagine he did not have air conditioning in his house at all? So we wanted to put air conditioning in. And he says, I don't want it. So I don't need air conditioning. I could learn without air conditioning. I don't need it. But we were insisting. So he says, I shop already. Why? You want air conditioning when you come to my house Friday night. Okay, I so you can put it in. But he didn't want to take air conditioning. Okay, so let's see what it says over here. So there was this Abavanka, the Havalei, the Resh Galusha of Huston. He had in his orchard, he had this tree and this cooling area. And Rashi points out that the Bustanov, his orchard was Yosy Mevesosayin, Shaloh Kapladira. So you weren't allowed to carry in that area. But he wanted to use that area. He wanted to use that baranka, which is smack in the middle of his orchard, which you're not allowed to carry in, he wanted to use that area and move around there. So he told him, Amr Lei, so the Rish Chalusa instructed the Huna Bar Chinina, Le Ovid Mar Takanta. I want you to fix up my area, my Abavarnka, so that the Lamachar Necho Nahama Awesome. So that tomorrow I can go eat there under the tree. So he knew it was going to be a hot Shabbos, and he wanted to have a meal in the comfort of his air-conditioned Bavarniki. So he asked Rav Huna Bar Chinina to somehow fix the problem of a carpet that Yosy and Beis Hasayim Shlahukachudi. Also, what did he do? Avat Kona Kona Pachas Mishlosh. He created a path, and we'll look at the picture of it. He created a path from the entrance of the house. So he had his mansion that abutted, there was actually one wall of the orchard, and he created this wall of vertical posts that were close together, so they took advantage of the principle of Lochot. And this way, it created a special cutout of Hukaf Ladira to service this Abavarnka, and therefore they would be able to carry in there on Shabbos, and they wouldn't have to worry. So what happened was we had some kanoim there. Also Rava, and I'm not sure how Rava found out about this situation that occurred. He must have found out, could be Rav Huna ben Yeshua, when he was trying to figure out the best solution. He probably consulted in the Bismedrish. I remember, if you ever wanted to get free research of an important halacha shaila, all you had to do was go into the coffee room and say over a shaila and a tshuva that someone important said, and then every hacker in the coffee room, who were often massive Talmidei Chachamim, would come up with a contrary opinion, because they have to one up whichever government you're quoting from. I once had a din Torah, and that was a nice hot topic. And I went to the coffee room. That's where I did my consultations. That's where I got my free legal advice. You know, when the government, when the court appoints a free defense counsel, they usually get him from the Lakewood coffee room. So I went into the Lakewood coffee room and I said over what the shaila was, and every svara possible I was able to extract out of there, and actually won the entire using those svaras, because we had people who were on a mission to show that they knew how to learn. There's a lot of disgruntled people in this coffee room, because he's the dayan. I'm a bigger Talmid Chacham than him. I should be the dayan. So there's a lot of such personalities there. So there's enough chips there on the shoulders that you could make a potato chip company there and start backing for the masses. So it was a lot of fun. If you never good free information, good tightness on a non-official way, that's the way to get it. And people think that you drink coffee in the coffee room. That's the last thing you do. It's like fishing. Nobody goes fishing because they want to catch fish. They want to smoke and drink, but they can't say I'm going to smoke and drink. So they say I'm going fishing. So you go into the coffee room. I'm going to do research. So what happened is also Rava wasn't so happy with what happened, because Rava felt it wasn't necessary. Rava felt that there's no problem here. You don't need any tikkun over here. And therefore, Shalfinu, he went and pulled out those posts. He pulled out those posts because he felt that they were not necessary. Why did he feel that he didn't need those posts? Why do you feel need this? Because he felt that once you have this Abavarnka here, it's considered Hukaf Deer, and there's going to be a lot of challenges that the Gemara is going to bring out to Rava's position. So, and not after Rava pulled him out, well, Rabbi Bar Chinina, who was originally hired by the Rish Galusa, Rav Huna Bar Chinina, who was originally hired by the Rish Galusa, could just put him back in. And Rava's Talmidim wanted to make sure that Rav Huna Bar Chinina won't put him back in. So therefore, also Rav Papa, Rav Huna Bar Yeshua, Naktinum Mivasrei, all of the posts that Rava pulled out, and he was just going to leave them there, they went and took them away. So now Rav Huna Bar Chinina can't even come back and put them in. L'mochar eisvei Ravina l'Rava. The next day, Ravina saw that Rava had disagreed with Rav Huna bar Chinan's approach of how to make this, how to rectify this area so that we can carry there. And Ravina didn't like Rava's approach. Ravina held that Rav Huna bar Chinan was right and you needed tikkun. Now, what was Rava's reasoning? What was Rava's reasoning to allow it? So there's actually two pshatim in Rashi. Rashi here at the end of the sugya recaps the whole sugya and brings in a pshat from the Tshuvas HaGoinim. So Rashi says with Tshuvas HaGoinim it's a siyah, the Loshen Acher, different than the Rashi from Farsh until now. The Yashar, the Einei Ma'oid. So he says as follows: Who was the karfef Yosy bebeisasayim? There was a karfef Yosy bebeisasayim. Shalachah. So that, of course, you can't carry it. The Abaranka, the Abarnaka, I'm not pronouncing it right, is Keminach Sadra. It's like a patio area, a gazebo area. A kuba, Shaboyin Hamalocha B'Secha Parda Shalachah. They build a little gazebo area. The Oimid Be'emsa Pardas, and this normally is smack in the middle of the Pardas. V'lo Hutzach Reish Kalusa Elon Metalto Mipesach Bustana Shaya Eitzel Abayis. He needed to be able to carry from the door of his house at the Baranaka until it's Abaranaka. The other Rav Huna bar Chinina came in Shvil in a Pesach at the Baranaka, Gedemikan, the Kana Pachs Megibel, the Hafsik Bein Haderech Labustana. So he just wanted to make a path. He just wanted to make a path to get from his home through the orchard into this gazebo area, and he wanted to be able to carry things back and forth. That's what he was trying to accomplish. Rava Kishafinu, Loy Lesser, Rava didn't pull it out because he thought it wouldn't work, and he held it was usher. In fact, it's to the contrary. And Lahakal Olav, he holds you don't need this tikkun. You could carry from your house into that gazebo without creating this new demarcated path with these corners. Why is that? The Shavrele, Rava had held, the Shari Little Tuli Bekulabustin. As a matter of fact, this entire area, this entire orchard, you're allowed to carry it. Why? This is an innovative approach. The Kina, the Kivan, the Banale, Abavarnaka, the Bustina. So let's think of what happened in a chronological order. They built this big fence around the whole Bustina and they planted the Bustina. They planted an orchard. So clearly, it's Lohuk Flatira. And after they did that, then they built in the center of the Bustina, they built this gazebo area. And Rava held extremely innovative that since I built a new structure inside the Bustina, even though it was Lohuk Flatira, Shavya the Kula Bustina Chotzer Lavernaka, Bahavamuka Flatira. So he holds, until now we discussed, someone put up a new house alongside Bustina, and he opened up an access from his house into it, and we had a problem. How do you convert it from hook of Shaloi Ladir to hook of Ladir? So we were talking about closing an fence or making a wall. That's what we discussed yesterday. Rav is saying in innovative Chiddush that if you just open up an opening from your house into there and you want to make that into a chutzner, then you need to do something to retrofit the wall so that should be considered hook of Ladir. But if you actually built a house or a bustin or a structure smack inside, that will retroactively convert the walls and make it into hook of Ladir. So it's a new approach, but it was a chiddush tiny that Rava came up with. And that's why Rava said, this entire orchard, I do not consider hook of Ladir. Why not? Because since you went and built this gazebo in it, it's going to retroactively make it into hook of Ladir. So the next day, Ravina, and there's going to be 3 attacks on Rava's position from 3 different places. So first, Ravina attacked Rava, and he said the following: Ir Chadasha. We're talking here about measuring the Tchum shots. So we need to know where the city ends. Where are the city limits that we count the 2,000 ames from that point? So Zok the Brisa, Ir Chadasha, if it's a new city, Moedid La Miyashivasa. You don't measure from the outside perimeter of its walls. You measure from where its houses end. And the Gemara is going to elaborate and explain a little bit better what this means. For Yeshana, if it's an older city, then Mechamasa. Then you count the city limits from its wall, which is logical. What do we consider a new city where you don't count from the wall, you count from the houses? And what do we consider an old city where you count from the wall, not from the houses? What happened was they were planning to build a city. So before they even built the city, they built a huge wall around it, around what they perceived, what they estimated would be the city. And then they started building houses in it. But the houses have not yet filled the entire perimeter that's surrounded by the wall. So therefore, you measure from the houses, because the houses really, the city really didn't expand yet to fill in the entire perimeter inside the wall. An old wall means, an old city means, Yoshvos HaHukva. First they established a city, and after the city spread out to its normal area, then they knew exactly where to build a wall. They built it around an inhabited area. So what do you see from here? You see that a wall that was built without residences has no standing. And therefore, the new city, you measure from the house, not from the wall. We don't give the wall validity. So the Hainami, so too in our case, first the wall was built, and then you built this gazebo. Then the Nasi built this gazebo inside. So just like over there, we say that the wall is not considered a wall around the city. It's not called a city wall. You can't count them there. You have to measure from the city itself. So too in our case, with the gazebo that was built after the wall went around the Bustaga, should not be able to transform the entire area into something that's hukah for you. So the first argument against Rava was your assessment that the fact that a gazebo was built in the middle of this orchard, that transforms it to hukah fadira. We could disprove that from this Ir Chadasha, where the walls are not going to become city walls because of the city that's built later. That was time number one. That was Eruvin. Eruvin had nothing to do with the story. He's a new character who was an observer as to what happened, so he mixed in and he told Rav his opinion. But now Rav Papa and Rav Huna Red Yeshua, who were Rav's allies, they were his Talmidim, and they supported him by being a kanoi, by not only Rav was satisfied just pulling out these sticks, they went and removed them so they couldn't put it back, and now they made a 180-degree turn after they had an opportunity to think this over. Because this is the next stage, it's a macher. Overnight they thought it over, and maybe they were too hasty in their decision to get rid of these things. And what did their papa say? Amor Papa, who just supported Rav the day before, now comes back to Rav and says, I disagree with you. Amor Abasi, mechitzos adarchalu, loishma mechitza. Let me see if I'm pronouncing that word properly. Adricholim. Mechitzos adricholim. Loishma mechitza. Mechitzos adricholim. I'll tell you exactly what they are. When I was in Lakewood, there was a period of time that they were not able to pay credit checks. The yeshiva was having a very hard time. And during that period of time, very bad timing, Rabbi Kiel was in the middle of doing a renovation on his home. Now, it would be very poor taste for everyone who walking by Rabbi Kiel's homes back and forth who haven't been paid in months because the yeshiva doesn't have money, sees a beautiful renovation project going on. So they, of course, surrounded the construction site with wooden barriers so that no one could see what's going on, right? And, they usually have a sign that says post no bills, and then it's full of signs. And what someone did was, someone took a big, big sign and posted it on that fence, and it says, your toilet checks, hard at work. Every time there's a construction project, there would be a sign on the road, your tax dollars, hard at work. So they had your toilet checks, hard at work. So anyway, the end of that story is that some of the top briskers in yeshiva, in the middle of first Seder, went over to Mokil and called them out of yeshiva and said they want to speak to him. They told him, what right do you have to be sitting and learning here while we're starving today? Sure, your Rosh Yeshiva says here, but the primary job of the Rosh Yeshiva is to sustain yeshiva. And Mokil Taka stopped early. He went out, He raised money, and they brought the Koil chips up to date, and then he came back to the yeshiva. Today, nobody would dare do that. But in my days, that's how things went down. So anyway, so these are construction barriers. Construction barriers are temporary barriers to to shield construction workers. So what do you see from here? If the walls were not built permanently for the purpose of living inside it, rather they were just built temporarily, and Rashi says, tomorrow, builders, if they're building on a hot day, they'll build a temporary wall around them to keep them cool. So keeping the tomorrow they're taking it down, get temporary walls, lav kumi, hanami. So too, this gazebo that was built that you think should be considered a dira, the little gazebo is not made to live in. It's made to spend some time in during the day. That's not considered a proper establishment of a dira. So that's the second attack that was brought against Rav. So another reason why Rav's opinion, Rav's arguing Rav's opinion, because this area should not be able to make it considered vocal for dira. So the first time it happened too late. The walls were there already. Second time is, and this thing that you say should be able to establish a makam dira isn't even strong enough to establish a makam dira. And then Rav Huna Rav Yeshua, who also supported Rav yesterday, turned around with an attack. Rav Huna Rav Yeshua, the Rav Huna said, "Mechitza hasuyla nachas, lo shel mechitza." A mechitza, Rashi says, that's not designed. It's not designed for someone to live in it. It's made for security. If you have something placed there, and you have a fence around it to secure that area, that's not called a good mechitza. How do you know that? So Rabbi Bar Avua ma'arav law lekula mechuza arsiyasa. The whole mechuza had multiple neighborhoods in it, and Rava would make a separate erev around each neighborhood. We should pay her to. And again, the best way to illustrate this is with a picture. So let's look at the picture in the art scroll, which is right over here. The way it worked is you could see you have two sets of chatzeros back to back that form a neighborhood. The people in these chatzeros go in and out to the main street through this model, and the people in these chatzeros go in and out through this model. So this is like a classical case of classical movies. And these would be typical movies normally. And all you would need, remember, if it's foolish on both sides, we know that according to Chananya, according to Basil, you would need a Tzuras of Pesach on one side, and you would need a Lechi V'Kara on the other side. That's how it would be if it was a normal movie with foolish. Or if you actually closed in the wall, here, and closed in the wall here, then for sure you wouldn't have a problem. It would be considered closed. So technically, in this city, all they have to do is build walls here, which they did, build walls here, which they did, and now they can carry them up. Of course, you need a shutuf in the woods. The problem is, as you can see, this little black line here, in the movies, on every street, on these two main streets, they had a big ditch, and in the ditch, everybody, it was like their massive green bin. Everybody would throw out their date pits into this ditch. And that was used as a trough for animals to eat there. It was a public feeding area for animals, and everybody threw their date pits there. So because of that, they put these walls up. The intention of when they put these walls up was not to enclose the mugli. It was actually just to protect these ditches of feed so that people or animals shouldn't come in and raid it. So these walls are asul. These are not walls that were designed to live in. They weren't to create a dira. The walls were placed there because they were there to protect this feed, this fodder. And therefore, therefore, who didn't want to accept it? The Gemara says, the Rabbi Bar Avua, this Rabbi Bar Avua, he wasn't able to use those walls as one big area, because since the main purpose of those walls enclosing the moguls were to protect the fodder, to protect those seeds, those date pits, therefore he couldn't consider it a dira and it wasn't a good wall. Correct the Gemara. But Peri de Vetura can mechitza asula nachas. Peri de Vetura is exactly like a mechitza, but not made to live there. It's just made to protect what's in there. And nevertheless, that's why you weren't allowed to use it. So too, this wall, this little gazebo that you built, again, it's not made to live in. It's not made to live in. It's made to create shade, made to keep your stuff. You can maybe store some things there. Rashi actually elaborates on it. It says, what would you put in this gazebo? You take off your overcoat, you would relax a little bit. The shark so it wasn't really a barrier built there that was made to live in. So Rava, how could you possibly state that the fact that the gazebo is there converts the entire bustana and makes it into Asilavir? So Rava seems to have an enormous position for him. So what happened? Karla Reish Lusa, so Reish Lusa looked at Rav Papa and looked at Rabbi Baruch. He said, Goysa Knakers. Chachamim Hemer, Goysa Knakers, you Chachamim. Lahara, your big Chachamim to come and cause me problems that you stole all those sticks and you took them away when I needed them. But yesterday you couldn't think of what you're thinking of today, that maybe what my Shliach or China is doing, maybe it's right. You didn't think about that. Couldn't call your kano and you make it messed up. And now you say sorry. Self Chazak, you messed up my whole area. What a familiar story. Zakta Gemara. Zakta Hela Gemara. Again, another thing I have to research a little bit is what you see from here is this area that was built. They built a wall that was made to protect the food, and because of that, Rabbi Baruch felt that you couldn't use it as part of an area. So let's think a second. I don't know how it's relevant, but it popped into my head. We use so many fixtures in our area that weren't made as walls to enclose people. If a wall has to be made to enclose people, does a Tzurish of Pesach, which acts as a wall, does that not also have to be made to enclose people? So how is a telephone wire any different than a wall that was built to protect the pairs? Or a fence that was built to stop people from walking on railroad tracks, which most of our area is built on? Why isn't that a problem? Why isn't that a problem of Peri of a wall that's also the nachas? So I don't know. I have a lot of questions that I have to ask, unless somebody here has information that they could share with me as to why this wouldn't be relevant in taking away our walls. Because our walls that we use, many of the walls that we use for our area, I think might be considered also nachas. They're not made to enclose a person, the dira. Oh, the teretz is very, very simple. It's not a carpet. This whole trial that we have, a wall that's also nachas, is one second. No, I don't know if that's the teretz, because here he wouldn't use it. He wouldn't use it in the area of mechuzah. He wouldn't use it in the area of mechuzah. So I'm not sure. So there, why wouldn't he be able to use it? Here he was just using it as a regular wall. So I'm not sure. I'll have to find out why it is. If anybody has any information to help me, I appreciate it. Amar Beloy. Shemati Mer Belazar Rafilu Beispor. So we're talking about what is the maximum size of a carpet, Shalahukah Faldira, that you're allowed to have and you're allowed to carry it. So most of the Tanoim in the Mishnah said base sasayim. However, and there was a shayla in the Mishnah, even if it's less than the base sasayim, you need to have some things in it, like huts in it, or not. Rabbi Kiva said you don't need anything in it. But then Rabbi Eliezer, was a Lashita, said that even if it's much bigger, it's still going to be allowed. Let me just see if I can find the Mishnah in the Archbook. There's so many pages to turn. So you. see what our mission is. Here's our mission, I believe. This one called base and base. Get to it. Too far. 1 second. Anybody remember where the mission is? It's on base. Gimel. Oh, here it is. It's Gimel with Aleph. I'm sorry. So the Gemara says over here, Omer Beloi, Shemati Merabelazar, Afilu he kavei skur, even if it's the size of a base core, even if it's so large, a core is 30 saw. So never mind 2 saw, even if it's hook up shaloy deer, and it's up to 30 saw, we're still going to allow you to carry it. So let's see what our Gemara says over here. Some placeholder, later. Zok the Haled Gemara. Omer Beloy, Shemati Mer Beloy Shafilu Beis Kor, which is 30 saw. Zok the Gemara, Masnizen Beloy Kechanan. Our Mishnah that quotes Rabbi Elazar as saying that the maximum is 30 saw or a base core is not consistent with Hananya. Because Hananya had a different version of what Rabbi Elazar said. Saying Hananya Imer, Vafilu he Arboim saw, even if this area, this carpet, is 40 saw, Ke'asteracha Shalmela, like the street behind the king's house, it would also be included in the exemption, and you'd be able to carry there if it's the hukah for deer. Rashi teaches us Asteracha Shalmelachim is Rechava Shachori Paltin. They used to have an area, an open area behind their palace. And this is where they would go to walk. Alma ikadir. So you see that that's called dira because it's used by kings, and that size of a property, which is 40 saw, is also considered a residential dira. They both actually learned their shita, the 30 saw, 40 saw from the same pasuk. They just have a difference in opinion of how to darshan the pasuk. Shnema, it says, Yosy came to tell Chizkiah, who was ill, that he was going to die. And Chizkiah did tshuva. And it says, even before he got out of the palace, even before he got into the backyard, he already heard a nevuah that Chizkiah was going to get better. Now, the pasuk reads, but if you open up the Nava, you'll see the word that it actually says is ha'ir atichayim. So we know the decree, we read it el chatzer, but the ksiv is ha'ir. So it says ksiv ha'ir ukrein chatzer. Nikan teaches you this Torah shel melech shahoyu kayaros beinims, that the siratis of kings were so big they were like the size of average cities. The king's private property, his private yard, was so big it was the size of an average city, because you see that the word chotzer, referring to the chotzer of the king, is written in the Torah using the word ir. Now the question is, what is the machlokes? But my community, Mar Shavar Ayores Beinonios having base. Our Mishnah, our Mishnah learns that an average city is like a base school, which is 30 saw. Umar Sover and Hananya holds that an average city memzah. That's the end of this shite. Breaking more of Yeshayo, my boy hustle. What in the world was Yeshayo doing in the backyard behind the palace? If Yeshayo was leaving the palace, don't you leave through the front door? You don't go to the backyard. So what was he doing in the backyard? So this is a beautiful Gemara. Chizkiah was not well. And Yeshayo made it in order to should be a schus for Yeshayo to get for Chizkiyahu to get better. Yeshayo Hanavi built a yeshiva by the door. He built a yeshiva by the door. And Rashi says, by the door. So I'm going to assume that the front door was blocked by the yeshiva. So because of that, in order for the Navi to leave, he had to leave through a different door. Mikan, you see from here, it's appropriate to build a yeshiva right by his door, and being that they're learning there, they'll block entrance to the Satan to come do any damage. But the Balav Milsi, it's not really a good idea. You know why? Dilma Ossi Higruya Besatan. Sometimes that can cause more problems. Because when the Satan sees a fight, even though it's a fight in learning, even though it's a good fight, they're totally learning, but when the Satan sees controversy, it attracts his attention to that area, and that could lead to problems. So therefore, even though Yeshayahu did it by Chizkiyahu, there's a shaila why he did it. There's different svaras that are thrown out in the art scroll. One svar is that Chizkiyahu was sick already, so we don't have to worry about Yirvah Satan. He was sick already, and he was very sick, so he had nothing to lose. Other pshatim are that Chizkiyahu was such a erlich person, such a tzaddik, he felt he wouldn't be negatively impacted by it. But a normal tzaddik who's sick, it wouldn't be appropriate to set up a yeshiva by his door. Now, in our Mishnah, if you remember, there were 3 chidushim that Rabbi Eliyahu quoted from Rabbi Eliezer. The first one was how big this carpet was allowed to be. It was 30 saw, and that's what we just explained from this last Gemara. The second halacha that Rabbi Eliyahu quoted from Eliezer is if one person in a chutzner forgot to make an eruv. So let's have a look at what the Mishnah says. We'll quote his nusach. And the third thing was about some type of species that you're allowed to use it for mora. So let's see. Have a look. Another thing that Rabbi Eliezer heard from Rabbi Eliezer was anshe chutzner sheshokach echad mehen v'lo irev and didn't do an eruv. So normally, if there's multiple homes in a chutzner, besides having the chutzner enclosed with a wall, we also have to join everybody and make them into one. The way we do it is we take some food and everybody is kind of part of it, and they put that into one person's home, and that somehow makes everything join. One person did not contribute to the area. So because of that, so he is not allowed to bring things from his house into the chutzner. As a guest of the others, he can bring things from their house into the chutzner, but he cannot bring things from his house into the chutzner, because that would show he's taking back ownership, and that would mess up the area. However, I apologize, I missed a very important component. He forgot to make an error. Since he didn't join the error, really everybody in the chutzner would now be also to carry it, because there's some personal ownership in there that's not joined with the rest of it. So the only way to fix that on Shabbos is if the person who did not become part of the Eruv, if he renounces, if he's mafker his interest in the chutzner, then he's not part of it anymore. He pulled his ownership away. He was misalik his ownership, and therefore he doesn't count. He doesn't impact what's happening in the chutzner, and therefore everybody would be allowed to carry. And the Midrash is even in his house of Lahem Mutter, they're even allowed to go into his house and take things in and out. Again, because it was bottled to them, he's relinquished his house and his chutzner to them, so they're allowed to go in and out of his house, but he's not allowed to. So that is what Rabbi Eloi heard from Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara is going to analyze it. So again, the facts of the case are that he was on Shabbos. This person was mevatel his rishus in that chutzner to everybody else. So now he has no rights. Because of that, he is no longer allowed to take things from his house into the chutzner. But they are. Right, the missions of the parish, they are allowed to move things back and forth from his house into the chutzner, because now it's all his house and the chutzner are all communal property that he was misalik himself from. But now we have a brisa that says contrary to our mission, because it says beisoy osur lahoitzu lahachnas loy vilahem. Our mission says that only he's not allowed to take things from his house into the chutzner, but the other members of this chutzner, the other inhabitants of this chutzner, are allowed to take things in and out of his house. Yet this brisa that we're quoting now says that even the other dwellers of the chutzner may not bring things in and out of his house. So how do we explain this contradiction? It's not a kasha because it's two different mandamrim. Ha Rabbi Elazar, the Rabbanan. One's Rabbi Elazar, one's Rabbanan. Our Mishnah clearly is Rabbi Elazar. The brisa that we're quoting is saying that nobody's allowed to go in and take anything out of his bias. That's going according to their law. Now, Zok Gemara. Let's try to understand a little bit of what is the machlokes told you. We have a machlokes if the other members of the chutzner are allowed to bring items in and out of his house to the chutzner. So Zok Gemara. If you want to think into understanding what this machlokes is all about, the Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, I would say that according to Rabbi Eliezer, Hamavato Rishus Chatzerot, Rishus Beis Habita. According to Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that anybody else is allowed to go in and out of my house and carry things in and out of my house, if I was mevatlik, it must be because when I was mevatel my interest in this chutzner, I was also mevatel my interest in my own home. So now my own home becomes part of the communal property, and therefore it's all one big property, and people are allowed to take in and out. But l'Rabbanan, mevatel rishus chatzeroi, rishus beis habita. I was only mevatel my financial interest in the actual chutzner, and therefore my ownership in the chutzner doesn't stare you from carrying it there. But I was never mevatel my personal home, and therefore you would not be allowed to carry in and out of my personal home, because that's separated from the chutzner, which is the public property. Zok Gemara Pshita, isn't that pretty obvious? Pshita the Bachit Pligi. Rav Sheshes is making it sound like he's offering a possible suggestion, he's pondering it. It's pretty obvious. That's exactly what the machlokes is. Is the house bottled to the oilam, and therefore they can go in and out of his house and carry stuff there or not? We're going to explain to you why Rav Sheshes was just theorizing, and he wasn't saying it with conviction, because he was trying to also extract a further halacha that's not obvious. And what halacha is Rav Sheshes trying to hint to that we also learn out of this machlokes between the Elazar and the Rabbanan that he didn't mention the parish is l'nitzrucha el l'chamisha sheshruim b'chutzner. Let's say this particular chutzner happened to have had 5 people in it. There's 5 houses in this chutzner, and all 5 are supposed to make the Eruvin chatzeres. But v'shachach echad mehen v'lo yiru, and one person did it. So this is the case that we're discussing. So the Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, kishum avato rishusai. So on Shabbos now, one member of the chutzner messed it up for everybody else. Everybody's angry at him because he's messing up there. So he has to fix it so that they can carry on Shabbos in the chutzner. So he has to be mevatel as rishus. The question is, does he have to be mevatel as rishus to each person individually, or can he just be mevatel as rishus to one person in the chutzner? So kishum mevatel rishusai ain't tzorich levatel l'chol echad v'echad. If I go over to one member, imagine this guy meets somebody in the chutzner, and his neighbor tells him, "You idiot! You messed us up. Now we can't carry." He says, "Oh, I feel so bad. I'm mevatel my rishus to you." So Rabbi Eliezer holds that since someone is mevatel ba'in yofa, we said not only is he mevatel his chutzner, his rishus in the chutzner, but he's also mevatel his rishus in the house. So you see, he's more ba'in yofa. He's giving away more. He's more giving. So when he tells one member of his group, when he tells one of his neighbors, "I'm mevatel my rishus to you," that automatically means that he's being mevatel his rishus to everybody. So if he just met one neighbor on the street, and he tells that one neighbor, "I'm mevatel my rishus to you," it solves the entire problem. Now everybody can carry in that chutzner. So therefore, ein tzorich levatel l'chol echad v'echad. L'Rabbanan kishum mevatel rishus ein tzorich levatel l'chol echad v'echad. So that's why Rav Sheshes says because he was just saying that Rabbi Eliezer holds someone's mevatel ben yofa, and the Rabbanan hold a person's not mevatel ben yofa, and that has 2 ramifications. It's nageya if they're allowed to carry in his house. Was he mevatel his house, or was he only mevatel his rishus in the chutzner? Thank you very much. A and B is it's also relevant to a shayla if he's mevatel himself to one person, if that automatically means he was mevatel himself to other people, and that's not mefurish. That you can't have cheat on. That's a theory that Reb Sheshes is extending himself to offer. Zaktimar Kaman Nasla Hadatanya. So based on this machlokes, we have a dual machlokes now according to Reb Sheshes between Reb Lezer and Reb Lezer. They're arguing about A, am I mevatel my house, and B is I talk to one person about being mevatel to everybody. So let's look at this brayso. Hadatanya Chamisha Shruin B'Chotzer Echad. The Shakach Echad Mehen V'Lo Yir. So Kishum Mevatel Rishusay Ein Tzarech Levatel Rishus L'Chol Echad V'Echad. Come on, who's that? One like Reb Lezer. That would be like Reb Lezer based on what we just explained. But Kana Masnei Hachi. Kana had this discussion with Sheshes go down in a different way. Now, the first way we learned, Reb Sheshes just said it's halacha. Reb Sheshes said an explanation to explain why you would be able to carry in and out of his house or not. And then Rachman on his own said Reb Sheshes meant also to include another shaila that if a person is mevatel to one of his neighbors, is mevatel to all of his neighbors. In the second nusach, Reb Sheshes explicitly stated that he meant that. And that's the whole different style that we're going to learn. Reb Tevumi Masni Hafi. So Rav Kahana is the one who quoted it the way we just read it. Rav Tevumi quotes it a different way. Masni Hafi. Kaman Masni Hafi Tanya Heishes Ruim B'Chotzer Echad. V'Shakach Echad Men V'Layir. V'Shim Mevatel V'Jusay Eid Tzarech Mevatel V'Jus L'Chol Echad V'Echad. Kaman Amar Rav Yuna. By Yehuda Amar Rav Sheshes. Kaman Kerbelazer. So you see Rav Sheshes Beferish said that the machlokes of the Rebbe and Lezer also applies to the shaila of whether or not a person's mevatel is chotzer to everybody or just to the person that is talking. Amar Rav Papa the Rebbe Lezer, who holds that a person is normally mevatel his house along with the chotzer. Yomer loy mevatel. What if I spoke out? I'm not being mevatel my house. I'm only mevatel my chotzer. We know if he stamazoi says I'm mevatel, it means his house. What if he speaks out? I don't want to be mevatel my house. I only want to be mevatel my chotzer. Or on the flip side, the Rabbanan who holds I normally am only mevatel my chotzer, and I'm normally not including my house. What happens in Yom Mevatil? What if I said to Farish, I want to be mevatel my house? What would the halacha be according to these two Tanoim, Rabbi Lezer and Rabbanan? Time with Rabbi Lezer. Why does Rabbi Lezer normally say that when I'm mevatel my cheduk in the chotzer, I'm automatically mevatel my house? Yishim de kasaver I'm mevatel rishus chatzeirai. Is because I'm a breita guy. I'm a breita guy. I want when I'm mevatel everything. The high and this fellow Omar I'm not mevatel. So therefore, if I spoke out that I'm not being mevatel it, today I'm not in the mood of feeling generous. Today I'm not going to be mevatel my house. Maybe it's not because I'm generous. That's not why Rabbi Eliezer holds my house is included. How much Rabbi Eliezer mishum the bayis below chotzer loy avidi inji the diary. Nobody wants to live in a home without a chotzer because the chotzer in those days was a major component of my house. That's where I did my things. That's where I most of the things that I did in the chotzer. They had smaller houses in those days, so the chotzer was a very integral part of their house. It was an extension of their house. So therefore they go together. And therefore, even if he wants to say I'm not being mevatel my house, it's not true. It doesn't make sense because Rashi says the kivun the less lechotzer dearest bias leklumuli today. It has no value. So therefore, automatically, when you're giving up your rights in the chotzer, you're automatically giving up your rights in your home as well. And therefore, even if you speak out, I don't want to be mevatel, it doesn't work. So that's the question. So that's the shayla. According to Rebbe Lezer, it's just a preference that I could say I'm not sticking with my preference this time, or is it an absolute that whenever I'm mevatel my chelik in the chotzer, I'm automatically mevatel my house. So therefore, alpha gav the amar dayarna loiklum lav klum kamar. It doesn't mean anything. And then in the Rabbanan we have the same shayla. The Rabbanan yom mevatilna. Normally, I'm not mevatel my house. But what if I said I specifically want to be mevatel not only my chelik in the chotzer, but also my chelik in the house? My time is Rabbanan Mishum Deksavi mevatel shus later shus based on the and therefore he's saying that I'm feeling generous today, and therefore his house is bottle, and therefore other people can carry in and out of his house. A person will never totally relinquish his rights to his entire property, both the chotzer and the bayis. And now he's going to be a guest in what was just a moment ago his own property. He'll never do that. And therefore, the Haiki, even if he says, I intend to be mevatel my house, lav kol kamine. He doesn't really mean it. He's not doing it. Rashi is bottle daita. It's a kolodam. Since nobody in their right mind would ever do it, nobody wants to relinquish everything that he has and be a guest in his own home. Therefore, we say that his das is bottle, and even though he said, "I'm a bottle my house," it's only the chatzar. So Omer, the answer that was given to who was clearing the shaila was asked. Papa asked Abaye the question. So Abaye answered back to Papa, Omer ben l'Rabbanan ben l'Blazer, even to go date gali. Whatever I say is true. So in the Belezer's case, if I say I don't want to be Mavaka my house is not bought, and therefore the other neighbors won't be able to carry it out of my house. According to the Rabbanan, who say normally I'm not Mavaka my house, if I spoke out that I'm Mavaka my house, then my neighbors will be allowed to carry it out. The Pesach, you're allowed to use Arkelovim as Mor. My Arkavolim, sorry. My Arkavolim, what are these? What is this vegetable? There was some type of netting material that grew naturally around palm trees. Rashi says Siv Ova was a thick type of netting type of plant. Hagadel Savavadeko that would grow around palm trees. And Nichach Va'oilaboy, it would like climb up the palm tree almost like a vine. So Chaziyozet Kupa Sarbi Yachad, it means there's a lot together. So it's the bundles of this clusters of this material, and it was that shaila if that was more or not, and the Rebbe says that it is more. I guess we could stop here, or should we go? Should we try to do the mission as well?
I got it.
Okay, so we'll stop here. Go ahead. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Tomorrow in Shul, we're learning. I think it's 5:55. Akiva said is Tanya for those who want. Not Tanya. Is the Sikha for those who want to learn it, and then we'll be starting
4:55.
4:55, and then 5:15. 5:15 we'll learn the daf. We'll start from here, and at 10 o'clock Motzei Shabbos I'll do the daf again for those who are not able to make it through. Go ahead. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Mr. Zalman?
Yes, Ranski.
I was just, if you have a minute, there's something might interest you.
I do.
When you were teaching me the Gemara, which discusses whether the pros and cons of making a yeshiva near somebody who's sick.
Right.
So it reminded me of a story. If I look at the Gemara from a purely practical point of view.
From a purely what point of view?
From a practical point of view.
Yeah.
Should a yeshiva be made next to a hospital? Should a yeshiva, which makes a lot of noise, be made next to a bunch of old, cranky, sick people? They once asked this question in a bit of a different form to the Netziv. The Netziv, his home was underneath the yeshiva of Volozhin. So they asked him, the Netziv, they said, Rabbi, how could it be that you live and you're able to sleep underneath the yeshiva that makes so much noise? So he says to the people who asked him, he says, did you ever go to a miller? A miller, the mill makes a tremendous amount of noise. Yet there's plenty of times when the miller has to lie down and his millstones are still going. During the season, the mills are going all night, and if he has to sleep during the night, he's got to sleep with the millstones turning a tremendous noise. He says, but the miller knows that
it's music to his ears. It means the business is producing even when he's sleeping.
Right, and that's my yeshiva. My yeshiva is the same thing. So I could learn the Gemara also that Chizkiyahu, who's such a tzaddik, would love to hear learn.
That was music to his ears. That was soothing.
But if he wasn't, but for other people who were not tzaddikim, they're cranky old men, right? So
the yeshiva is only a shmira if it gives you enjoyment. If it bothers you, how could it give you a shmir if you really don't want it? That's the thing there. Very nice.
That's the way I put the Gemara.
So have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. I assume you're in Bel Yurt for Shabbos.
No. The family says that